Air Combat, or as it's known in the original Japanese release, Ace Combat. This is the first console entry in the eponymous franchise, and if you count the arcade games, it's the third entry overall. As the title implies, this is a game about piloting a plane and shooting stuff. It's an air combat game. I won't call it a flight simulator because only half of that label applies. It was developed and published by Namco in June of 1995 on PlayStation. That's about 6 months after the Japanese release of that console, making Air Combat one of the earlier instances of a fully 3D flight game on a home console. As such, pretty much everything about the game is bare bones. Bare bones gameplay, bare bones missions, bare bones visuals, etc. The story is paper thin as well. You play as a mercenary employed to aid in the liberation of an unnamed country taken over after a coup d'etat. The short introduction speech at the beginning of the game is as much story as you'll get. You start by selecting a difficulty setting. I think normal is just right, while hard is genuinely difficult, in the sense that there's more enemies who can lock onto you faster, and missiles are near guaranteed one-hit kill. Difficulty also influences how many planes you own by default, and on hard, if you crash, it's a game over, while on lower difficulty settings you merely lose your plane and need to buy another one. To be honest, I find that redundant since you can just save after every mission and reload if necessary. From there on, you pick a mission on the map and progress through the game. You can play missions somewhat out of order, but you'll have to do them all to beat the game. Each mission grants you money based on the default pay and how many kills you got. This is a good incentive to stick around longer in a mission to clean house. Or at least it would be if money wasn't such a non-issue. The minimum you get is so high that you will barely have to worry about saving up, which I think is a bit of a missed opportunity. With that dough, you can buy new planes or hire wingmen, but quite frankly you can reasonably beat the game using only the default plane. The game features 16 real-life jets, which I think is a good number for a 17 missions long game. Each plane has a set of stats guiding its responsiveness, speed, defense, and offense. Some planes also have stealth capabilities to sneak on enemies more easily, but they trade off other stats which I think are more important. Now it's time to actually play the missions. Each of them places you in a dedicated map, and the majority consist of shooting down given targets on the ground or in the air. The game switches things up sometimes by asking you to maneuver in a restricted space or find targets on your own, for example. In any case, missions are small in scope. They rarely contain many targets, and some of them can be completed in less than 3 minutes if you're a decent pilot, so you're probably going to blast through the game quick. So quick, in fact, that I beat the game in 1 hour and 40 minutes upon replay for this video, so expect something like 2 hours on your first time through. It's a bit of a nitpick, but I found going from a mission to the next to be a bit cumbersome. You have to jump around on positions on the map to select the mission you want to play. I assume this was done for immersion purposes, but I'd rather just have a list. Let's talk about the controls. The game lets you choose between a novice mode where you can only pitch and the game takes care of turning, and an expert mode where you have the standard 4 degrees of freedom. I've never bothered with novice as I think it takes away from the experience of piloting a jet. Every plane has the same weapons, a machine gun and a couple dozen guided missiles, so no such thing as bombers or fighters. Jets have limited fuel, but as I mentioned earlier, you should beat missions too fast for this to ever be an issue. Here's the biggest complaint I think you can have about this game. It doesn't support analog controls, only the base PlayStation controller with no sticks. That means rolling and pitching is done using the D-pad. It's usable, but this is immensely clunkier than using a stick. Despite that, the biggest advantage this game and the franchise in general has is that it's very accessible. I don't know the first thing about how planes work, but I know how to pitch and roll, and that's good enough to be competent. Of course, that could also deter you if you can't stand arcade gameplay. As I mentioned earlier, there's a wingman system where you can hire a pilot to help you in your missions. At least, in theory. In practice, you'd be lucky if they got even 1 kill. That makes them a waste of money more than anything. Audio is unremarkable. The voice acting is passable and sound effects are very standard. The soundtrack is very, well...
Enemy targets located. Enemy in sight.
vintage, but I don't mind it. Visuals are very simplistic. Too simplistic sometimes in fact, mostly because the ground is one texture that blends into the horizon, making it difficult to judge how high you are by view. There's a bit of variation with forests, deserts, mountains, etc., but again, abstract and low detail. In comparison, the planes are much more detailed, thankfully. If you like me though, you might not spend long looking at them, as the game lets you choose between a first and a third person camera. I favor the first person perspective because more informations are displayed on screen, like altitude, angle, and bearing. And that's about all the game has to offer. It's extremely short with little variety or depth, but at the same time it doesn't do anything wrong. You won't lose much by giving it a shot, and you'll be able to tell immediately if you can stand the digital controls. Would I call air combat obsolete? Nearly. I believe that until its missions are ported into another Ace Combat game, this one still has something to offer. But as for everything else, yeah, it's obsolete. Everything about the game would be improved by later entries, like having analog controls, obviously, but also bigger and more varied missions, the ability to move the camera, to have special weapons like bombs, and having a really exciting story, which becomes an increasingly important factor in keeping the games fresh as the franchise continues.